The courtroom fell into a strange, chilling silence the moment Officer Dalton's boot slammed into Manny Pacquiao's leg. It wasn't just a kick, it was the kind of strike meant to humiliate, to dominate, to remind everyone who held the power in that room. The sound echoed through the wooden walls like a gunshot. Papers stopped rustling. Pens stopped moving. People froze mid-breath, unsure if they had really seen what they just saw. Everyone stood in shock. Everyone except the cop. Dalton smirked proudly, chest puffed out as if he had just accomplished something meaningful. As if hurting a man who hadn't even raised a hand was some kind of heroic act. His badge flashed under the courtroom lights, not as a symbol of justice, but as a weapon of authority misused. "You don't belong here," he barked, voice sharp, loud, dripping with arrogance. He spoke as though the entire courthouse was his personal territory, as though every soul inside owed him their obedience. His energy filled the room like a storm cloud, dark, loud, and full of lightning ready to strike again. Manny Pacquiao didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply stood there, absorbing the impact with a calm expression that confused everyone who witnessed the scene. His posture remained steady, his breathing even, his eyes alert but peaceful. There was something unusual about his composure, a quiet strength that didn't need aggression to be seen. It was the kind of silence that only comes from someone who has faced far worse battles than a courtroom bully with a badge. Some people in the courtroom recognized him instantly, the face, the presence, the unmistakable calmness of a champion. But others, like Officer Dalton, were blinded by ego. They didn't see the legend standing before them. They didn't see the global icon, the man known not just for his victories but for his humility. Dalton only saw a nobody who dared to walk into the courtroom without his permission. Whispers began spreading, soft but urgent. "That's Manny Pacquiao. Is that really him? Why would he kick him? Does he not know who he just touched?" But Manny didn't react to the whispers. He didn't react to the cameras. He didn't react to the pain. He just stood still, almost too calm. Dalton took a step closer, his boots thudding on the floor like deliberate threats. "Didn't you hear me?" he growled, his voice now carrying a hint of insecurity, as if Manny's silence was more intimidating than any confrontation. Still, Manny's expression remained peaceful. "Officer," he finally said, his tone soft yet steady, "there's no need for violence." Dalton scoffed, leaning in with a mocking grin. "You think I care who you are? You think that soft voice means anything here? This is my courtroom. My rules. And people like you don't get to stand wherever you want." His voice dripped with disrespect, each word stabbing harder than the last. The judge looked up from the bench, stunned. The attorneys exchanged nervous glances. Spectators pulled out their phones cautiously, knowing something major was unfolding, something far bigger than a courtroom dispute. Then, with absolute calmness, Manny lowered his gaze, reached into his pocket, and pulled out his phone. His hand didn't shake. His breathing didn't change. It was as if he had already decided exactly what needed to happen next. He whispered just loud enough for the officer to hear. "All right. If this is how you treat people, then let me make one call. No anger. No threats. Just a quiet promise." The moment those words left his lips, the atmosphere shifted. Something in the air tightened, a tension so thick the entire room felt it. Dalton's smirk flickered for the first time, confusion crawling into the edges of his confidence. Because deep down, even arrogant men can sense when they've crossed a line they should never have touched. And that one phone call, simple, quiet, unexpected, was about to flip the entire courtroom upside down. The man Dalton thought he could kick like a stranger was about to reveal exactly who he really was. And the officer who felt untouchable was about to learn a lesson he would never forget. It was one of those mornings inside the Central District Court where everything felt louder than usual. Chairs scraping, officers shouting, lawyers arguing, printers buzzing non-stop. Papers fluttered across desks like restless birds, and the echo of hurried footsteps bounced off every marble wall. The courthouse was alive, but not in a peaceful way. It was chaotic, tense, almost suffocating. In the middle of this noisy storm stood Officer Dalton. His presence alone seemed to silence people in the hallway. Not out of respect, but out of fear. Dalton was a man known more for his temper than his discipline, a man whose ego was often bigger than the cases he handled. His heavy boots hit the ground with loud, intentional thuds, like each step was a warning. He shoved officers aside with the back of his hand, slapped files onto desks, and barked orders like a drill sergeant having the worst day of his life. Move. Make it fast. Don't stand there like an idiot. Get it done. That's not how I want it. Fix it. Every word left his mouth with the weight of a threat. He behaved less like an officer of the law and more like a self-appointed king of the courthouse, ruling with impatience and arrogance. People avoided eye contact. Interns stepped out of his way. Even senior officers stayed silent when he approached. Dalton thrived on it, the fear, the silence, the trembling respect he forced out of others. He believed the courtroom was his territory, his domain, his fortress. He walked through the lobby with a swagger that said he believed nothing and no one could challenge him. And then, the doors opened. But not with a loud crash. Not with a grand entrance. They opened quietly, a soft, almost unnoticed push. A man stepped inside with the gentleness of someone who never needed to announce his presence. His jacket was simple, worn around the edges. His shoes were clean but modest. His posture calm, straight, confident without being loud. His expression soft, almost peaceful, as though he carried no weight on his shoulders despite a life filled with battles. Manny Pacquiao entered the courthouse the way a breeze slips through an open window, unnoticed at first, but impossible to ignore once you feel it. No entourage. No bodyguards. No reporters. No one trailing behind him. Just Manny, quiet, composed, humble as ever. He didn't walk like a celebrity. He didn't move like a champion. He moved like a man who had simply come to be present for someone who mattered to him, a close community friend whose hearing he intended to observe in silence. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small slip of paper, the case number. He checked it, nodded to himself, and began walking toward the courtroom door. To everyone who noticed him, the moment felt unreal. Could someone that famous walk so simply, so silently, so unnoticed? But there was one man who didn't recognize him. Didn't care to recognize him. Didn't even bother to look properly. Officer Dalton. Dalton caught the movement out of the corner of his eye. A man entering without asking. A man walking calmly instead of scrambling like everyone else. A man who didn't flinch under Dalton's aggressive energy. Dalton didn't like that. Not one bit. "What are you doing?" he snapped, marching toward Manny like a storm cloud barreling in. Manny paused gently. "Just going in to observe." "Hey, not your turn. Step back." Dalton barked before Manny could finish. His voice shook the hallway. People turned. Whispers sparked. Manny lowered his eyes in a respectful nod. "I'm here for the hearing." "Did I ask you?" Dalton growled, stepping closer, invading Manny's personal space. There was no reason for the aggression. No reason for the hostility. No reason for the disrespect. But Dalton wasn't guided by reason. He was guided by ego. To him, Manny looked like any other civilian trying to enter the courtroom without permission. A nobody. A face in the crowd. A man not worth a second of respect. Dalton shoved him, hard, pushing him back a full step. The sound of Manny's shoes sliding across the polished floor echoed through the hall like a warning bell. And instantly, the entire courtroom gasped. Every head turned. A hush fell. Even the judge, deep in discussion with his clerk, looked up at the sudden silence. Dalton didn't even care. He straightened his collar, puffed out his chest, and stared Manny down with the cold confidence of someone who had gotten away with far too much for far too long. But Manny simply breathed in slowly. No anger. No retaliation. No shock. Just a calm acceptance, the kind that only comes from a man who knows exactly who he is, and doesn't need to prove it. The tension in the room thickened. People watched, holding their breath. And before anything else could happen, before the next moment could unfold, let me ask you, should cops treat everyone equally, yes or no? Officer Dalton didn't stop at shoving. His first push was meant to warn. His second would be meant to dominate. "Did you hear me?" he growled, stepping forward with a glare sharp enough to cut glass. His voice carried through the entire courtroom like a crack of thunder, loud, violent, unnecessary. And before Manny could even respond, Dalton lifted his boot and drove it hard into Manny's leg, pushing him backward with force intended not just to move him, but to humiliate him in front of everyone watching. The sound of the impact echoed across the wooden floors, bouncing off the courtroom walls like a cruel announcement of dominance. The room went stiff. A wave of whispers rippled across the spectators' benches. "That's Manny Pacquiao. What is he doing? Why would he kick him? Is he insane?" Some recognized the face. Others recognized the posture, the calmness that was unmistakable. But Dalton recognized none of it. He didn't see a champion. He didn't see a global icon. He saw only what his ego allowed him to see. A man he thought was beneath him. Manny tightened his stance to maintain balance but never lifted his hands. He didn't lash out, didn't shout, didn't give the officer a single reaction that would match the aggression being thrown at him. Instead, he simply lifted his eyes. Calm. Steady. Unshaken. "Officer," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow clear enough for everyone to hear, "violence isn't necessary." And that gentle response, the calm tone, the lack of fear, infuriated Dalton more than any argument would have. Dalton smirked, leaning in, his eyes filled with superiority. "You think I care who you are?" he spat. "This is my courthouse. I decide what happens here. And if I tell you to leave, you leave." His hand shot out, grabbing Manny's arm with a tight, bruising grip. He yanked him forward, dragging him toward the bench as if he were nothing more than a misbehaving child. Gasps filled the courtroom. A few people reached for their phones, not out of curiosity but out of disbelief, capturing the moment they knew would spark outrage. "Get your hands off him!" someone whispered under their breath, but too quietly for Dalton to hear. Dalton pointed toward the exit with the authority of a tyrant. "You have 10 seconds to walk out that door before I arrest you," he growled. "And trust me, you don't want to find out what happens next if you stay." People looked away, afraid that eye contact alone might make them part of Dalton's wrath. Others stared with wide eyes, unable to look away from the chaos unfolding before them. But Manny, he stayed still. Perfectly still. Not angry, there was no fire in his eyes. Not afraid, no tremble in his voice or hands. Just disappointed, as though watching a child throw a tantrum. The kind of disappointment that hurts more than anger. Dalton didn't notice it. He was too busy reveling in what he thought was victory, too busy enjoying a moment he believed placed him above everyone else. "Tick-tock," Dalton sneered, tapping his watch. 9-8. Manny slowly inhaled. Then he reached into his pocket. Not in panic. Not in fear. Not in resistance. But with a calmness so controlled the room seemed to stop breathing. He pulled out his phone. Dalton's countdown paused mid-word. "What are you doing?" he demanded, suddenly unsure. Manny didn't look at him. He didn't look at the crowd. He simply glanced at the screen, unlocked it, and raised it gently to his ear. "All right," he whispered, to himself, to the officer, to the entire room. "If this is how you treat people, then let me make one call. Just one call. A quiet one. A simple one." But it carried a weight that the whole courtroom felt instantly. Some spectators shifted on their benches, uneasy. Others leaned forward, sensing the atmosphere changing. Dalton tried to laugh it off. "Oh, please," he scoffed. "Call whoever you want. Call your friend, your neighbor, your whatever. Nobody can help you here. Not in my courtroom." But there was a crack in his voice now, a tiny tremor that betrayed the confidence he was desperately trying to maintain. Even his posture changed. Just a little. Just enough for people to notice. Because there are two kinds of silence in the world. One that is weak, scared. And one that is powerful, predicting a storm. Manny's silence was the second. His calmness didn't make sense to Dalton. It didn't fit the script of how victims were supposed to react. And that confusion began eating at him. The phone call was short, barely a few seconds. But the moment Manny lowered the phone, something shifted in the air. The courtroom that once felt like Dalton's domain now felt like the calm before an earthquake. Dalton swallowed hard, suddenly unsure of the walls he used to lean on for confidence. Because deep inside, even the most arrogant man can sense when the ground beneath him is about to crack. And Manny Pacquiao, silent, steady, unbothered, had just set everything in motion. The confidence on Officer Dalton's face didn't last long. He folded his arms, still trying to look superior, still pretending the situation was under his control. "Go ahead," he sneered. "Make all the calls you want. Nobody here outranks me in this courtroom." But the room disagreed. The moment Manny Pacquiao stepped to the side, raised his phone, and dialed with that unnerving calmness, the energy shifted. People who were whispering now leaned closer. Phones lowered. Eyes sharpened. A strange silence rolled through the courtroom, slow, heavy, almost warning. No one could hear who Manny was calling. No one knew what he was about to do. But everyone could feel it. Even the judge, who seconds ago had been flipping through case files, paused mid-motion. His glasses slid down his nose as he stared over them, confused. Dalton noticed all of this. The stares, the tension, the sudden quiet. And for the first time, he felt something he hadn't felt all morning. Uncertainty. Still, he forced out a laugh. "Relax, people. He's bluffing. Happens all the time." But Manny wasn't bluffing. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't explain himself. He didn't even look at Dalton. He simply brought the phone to his ear. "Sir," Manny said gently, "I need your help." Just 2 words. 2 soft, quiet words. But they sent a chill across the room. Several people exchanged worried glances. Some whispered, "Who did he just call? Why does he sound so calm? This cop is in trouble." Dalton's smirk flickered. The cracks showed. He tried to stand taller, but for the first time, the confidence wasn't natural. It looked forced. "Put the phone down," Dalton snapped. But his voice wasn't commanding anymore. It shook, barely, but enough for the room to notice. Manny didn't even acknowledge him. He just nodded once as the person on the other end of the call finished speaking. "Thank you," Manny said softly. He ended the call. Nothing more. No threats. No explanations. He slipped the phone into his pocket and stood still, hands folded in front of him, looking almost peaceful. This terrified Dalton even more. "What did you do?" the officer demanded. "Who did you call? Don't play games with me." Manny looked at him, slow, calm, unshaken. "You'll find out," he replied. A pin could have dropped in that courtroom. Even the judge leaned forward, whispering to the clerk, "Keep an eye on this. Something's coming." Seconds ticked by with agonizing slowness. Dalton paced like a restless predator who suddenly feared his prey. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. He turned to the other officers. "You keep him where he is. And someone check his phone records. I want to know who he thinks he's calling." But none of the officers moved. They were watching Manny too, studying him, reevaluating everything. And then, boom. The courtroom doors burst open with a force so sudden that everyone jumped. The sound echoed like a thunderclap. Dalton spun around, startled. "Who there?" But the words stuck in his throat. Because the people entering weren't ordinary officers. Their uniforms were different. Their presence was commanding. Their posture was razor-sharp. These were high-ranking officials, the kind no one expected to see in a regular district courtroom on a random morning. People gasped. The judge stood. Even the clerk stumbled backward. And Dalton's face drained of color. Because the moment those officials walked inside, their eyes went straight to one person. Not him. Manny Pacquiao. They walked with purpose, cutting through the silent crowd, their footsteps echoing against the polished floor. Dalton stepped back, panic flickering in his eyes. Wait, why are they here? What's going on? But deep in his gut, he already knew. The call Manny made wasn't small. It wasn't casual. It wasn't something Dalton could brush off. The room held its breath as the officials stopped right in front of Manny and bowed their heads respectfully. Dalton's world began to cave in. And it was only the beginning. The three high-ranking officials didn't walk into the courtroom. They commanded it. Their presence alone shifted the air. Sharp uniforms, precise steps, expressions that meant business. These were not routine officers or local supervisors. They were the kind of people who only showed up when something serious had happened. And whatever Manny Pacquiao had said during that short phone call was serious. The entire courtroom watched in stunned silence as the officials moved with unwavering purpose through the aisle. Not once did they look left or right. Not once did they hesitate. Their eyes were fixed solely on Manny. Dalton's heart thudded in his chest. His swagger was gone, completely erased, replaced by a creeping dread he couldn't hide. The officials stopped right in front of Manny. Then, shocking everyone all at once, they bowed their heads. Respectfully. Formally. Without hesitation. "Sir," the lead official said, voice steady but urgent, "we came as soon as you called." The room exploded with gasps. Some dropped their papers. Some covered their mouths. People who had been shy moments ago leaned over benches just to get a closer look. And Officer Dalton. His entire face went blank. Wait," he muttered. He looked from the officials to Manny, back to the officials. His throat tightened. "Sir," he whispered. "Him." But the lead official wasn't looking at Dalton. Not yet. He turned slowly, almost dramatically, meeting the trembling officer's eyes. "Officer Dalton," he said with cold authority, "do you have any idea who you kicked? Who you insulted? Who you put your hands on?" Dalton swallowed so hard it echoed. His voice cracked. "I thought he was just some guy." The official stepped closer. Close enough that the entire room leaned in. "He is Senator Manny Pacquiao," the official declared firmly. Each word hit like a hammer. "And more importantly, he is a national icon who deserves respect from every officer under the law." A suffocating silence fell. Even the judge froze, hands gripping the bench. Clerks exchanged terrified glances. People in the benches stared at Manny with awe and disbelief. Dalton staggered backward as if the truth itself had pushed him. "As senator," he pointed weakly. Him. That's him." His mind scrambled for excuses, explanations, anything. But nothing came. Manny stood there calm, humble, almost serene. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't intimidating. He was simply Manny. The Manny Pacquiao who didn't need to brag. The Manny who didn't flaunt his status. The Manny who had walked in alone, without security, without entourage, without noise. And yet here he was, commanding the attention of high-ranking officials without even trying. The lead official softened his tone slightly. Not out of kindness for Dalton, but out of respect for Manny. "Sir," he said, turning back to him, "we deeply apologize for what happened." Manny shook his head gently. "No need," he replied. "I didn't call for punishment. I called because I wanted clarity, fairness." He turned his calm eyes toward Dalton. "I didn't want trouble," Manny said softly. "Only respect and fairness." Dalton felt a weight land on his shoulders, one far heavier than the badge he wore. He opened his mouth, but the words crumbled before they formed. All he managed to whisper was, I didn't know." A murmur rolled through the room. Some people felt sympathy for Manny's humility. Others felt satisfaction watching Dalton crumble under the truth. And many just stared in awe at the quiet power of a man who never had to raise his voice. One thing was clear. This wasn't just a reveal. It was a lesson. One that would stay with every person in that courtroom for a very long time. Question for audience. If you were Manny, would you forgive the officer? Or file charges? Dalton's legs felt weak, like the ground beneath him had disappeared. The officer who had strutted through the courtroom minutes earlier now looked nothing like the man who had kicked Manny Pacquiao. His confidence had drained out of him completely. He swallowed hard, stepped forward shakily, and lowered his head. "Sir." His voice cracked. I'm sorry. I didn't know." Manny didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't show anger. His expression was steady, calm enough to silence the entire room. That's exactly the problem, Manny replied softly. You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with respect. The words didn't thunder. They didn't shout. But they hit harder than anything Dalton had ever heard in his career. The lead official stepped in, voice firm and polished. Officer Dalton, he announced, you are suspended effective immediately. You will undergo a full disciplinary review for misconduct and abuse of authority. A murmur erupted through the courtroom. People leaned toward each other, whispering harshly. That's what he deserves. He kicked a national hero. Imagine doing that to Manny Pacquiao. Dalton's shoulders collapsed. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 seconds. But Manny raised a hand gently, just enough to stop the official from continuing. He wasn't defending Dalton. He wasn't excusing what happened. He was choosing wisdom over ego. Manny turned slightly toward the official. No need for harsh punishment, he said. His tone wasn't soft, just sincere. Just make sure he learns the value of humility. The official stared at Manny for a moment, surprised. Not by the words, but by the calmness behind them. A man with his status could have pushed for a harsher consequence. He could have demanded it. People would have supported it. But he didn't. He chose restraint. Dalton's eyes watered, not because of fear, but because he wasn't prepared for kindness from the man he had humiliated. Sir, he whispered, voice trembling. Thank you. Manny gave a small nod. Not approval. Not forgiveness. Just acknowledgement that the message had been heard. The judge exhaled quietly. Clerks shifted in their seats. Even spectators who had been recording slowly lowered their phones. Everyone expected Manny to be angry, to demand justice, to make an example out of Dalton. Instead, he had done something far more powerful. He had turned the moment into a lesson. A lesson everyone in that courtroom knew they'd remember whenever they put on a uniform, walked into a public building, or interacted with another human being. The head official stepped back respectfully. We will handle the review, he assured, and ensure proper training is enforced for all officers moving forward. Manny nodded. Respect, he said quietly, shouldn't depend on status. It should be the foundation of every interaction. His words floated through the room with an unusual calm. Calm that somehow carried more strength than shouting ever could. Dalton stepped aside, still trembling but now visibly humbled. He knew this incident would follow him for the rest of his career. Not as a punishment, but as a reminder. Manny walked back toward the benches, each step steady, grounded, peaceful. People made space for him without being told to. Not out of fear, but out of admiration. He didn't look triumphant. He didn't look victorious. He just looked centered. As he sat down, the room seemed to breathe again. Conversations resumed quietly, but every voice carried respect. Even the judge regained composure and adjusted his glasses, still shaken by the unexpected turn of events. Manny had walked into the courtroom as a quiet man in a simple jacket. He was leaving as a symbol of humility and strength. The message was clear. True power isn't loud. True power doesn't brag. True power doesn't need to humiliate anyone. Sometimes, the strongest person in the room is the one who stays calm when disrespected, and chooses fairness over revenge. And everyone there, every spectator, every clerk, every officer, felt the weight of that truth. Because they hadn't just witnessed justice. They had witnessed character. The courtroom slowly returned to order, but the atmosphere was different now. Softer, quieter, almost reverent. What had happened wasn't just a confrontation. It was a reminder. A lesson people would carry with them long after they left the building. Respect. A word so simple, yet so often forgotten. In that room, everyone had seen what happens when arrogance blinds a person. They saw how quickly power can be abused, and how quickly it collapses when truth steps into the light. What Manny demonstrated wasn't just calmness. It was character. He never raised his voice. He never fought back. He never demanded recognition. He let humility speak louder than pride ever could. Respect isn't about status, titles, or who stands in front of you. It isn't about whether someone looks important or ordinary. It isn't about uniforms, badges, or authority. Respect is about how you treat people when you think they're nobody. Because that moment, that small, ordinary moment, reveals who you are. And sometimes, the person you look down on today is the person standing above you tomorrow. Not because they rose suddenly, but because you never bothered to see who they truly were. Manny's reaction showed a kind of strength most people never master. Not the strength of fists or power, but the strength of restraint. The strength of choosing wisdom over revenge. The strength of teaching without humiliating. In a world where anger spreads fast and ego speaks loudly, a calm mind is a rare kind of courage. Arrogance is weakness. Humility is strength. And that day, the courtroom witnessed the difference with undeniable clarity. People left the building with a story to tell. Not about chaos or drama, but about a man who didn't need to prove who he was. A man who earned respect not by demanding it, but by embodying it. Even those who had recorded the incident lowered their phones. Not chasing views anymore, but reflecting on what they had just seen. The lesson was simple. When you treat every person with dignity, whether they're famous, unknown, rich, poor, powerful, or quiet, you honor not just them, but yourself. So if you believe in fairness, humility, and kindness, if you believe that real strength comes from respect, if you believe that the world needs more calm voices and fewer raised fists, type respect in the comments. Let the world see how many people still value humanity over ego. And before you go, tell me where you're watching from. I want to thank you personally for being part of a community that believes in dignity, decency, and strength without cruelty. Because stories like this aren't just entertainment. They're reminders. And sometimes, one reminder is all it takes to change the way someone treats the next person who crosses their path.